It was a Saturday evening. The Langford family reunion. A tradition, my father called it, though it always felt more like an annual interrogation with wine. I hadn't wanted to go. Not this year. Not after the job interview I didn't get, or the apartment ceiling that had caved in after a rainstorm. But when my mom called and said, "It's important to your father," I gave in, like I always did. The house was packed. Cousins, uncles, their new wives, their perfect children. The air was a mix of beef, red wine, and old resentments. My brothers, Mason and Eric, had already taken over the living room. Mason showing off photos from his latest international conference. Eric talking about his investment property portfolio like he was 25 and retired. I stood in the hallway for a full 2 minutes before stepping in. I wasn't even late. I was just trying to find a version of myself that wouldn't get picked apart the second I entered. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes scanned my outfit. Black jeans, navy blouse, hair pinned back. And I saw the corners of her mouth tighten, like she was swallowing her disappointment with a sip of her wine. "You could have dressed up a little," she said as she leaned in for a kiss. I forced a smile. "Nice to see you too, Mom." I found a quiet seat at the far end of the dining table, next to Grandpa. He gave my hand a quick squeeze, his fingers warm and a little shaky. He'd always been softer with me than the others, more observant. Dinner started harmless enough, polite conversation. "How's the weather in Chicago? Did you catch the game last week?" But the cracks began to show the moment Dad raised his glass. "To family," he said, standing tall, his voice booming with the self-importance of someone who'd never once had to question his own place at the head of the table. "To strong men who carry our legacy forward, Mason with his medical breakthroughs, Eric with his real estate empire." His eyes landed on me. The last one, the afterthought. "And Melissa," he added, voice tightening. "Still trying to figure things out, I suppose." There it was. The jab wrapped in politeness. The silence around the table was instant. No one looked up. No one said a word. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're shrinking by the second. I took a sip of water. My hand didn't shake, but my chest felt like it was caving in. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my mother beat me to it. "If only we had 2 sons instead of you," she said casually, almost like a joke. "Can you imagine how much simpler life would have been?" And she laughed. Laughed. As if those words hadn't sliced right through me in front of 12 people. I couldn't breathe. I looked around for someone, anyone, to speak up, to say it wasn't okay. But no one moved. No one even looked surprised. That's when Grandpa's hand slammed down on the table. Hard. Everyone jumped. "Enough," he said, voice gravelly and sharp. "It is time I reveal the truth." Every head turned. Even my father looked stunned. The room, which just seconds ago had been full of passive smirks and clinking glasses, fell into an eerie, suspended quiet. The kind that precedes something irreversible. My heart was pounding. Grandpa stood up slowly. His hands were trembling now, but his voice? Steady. Steel wrapped in velvet. "There are things this family has buried for too long," he said, eyes fixed on my parents. "But I won't let you shame Melissa another second. Not when you've been hiding the truth about her since the day she was born." The words dropped like bricks. My mother's face went pale. My father didn't blink. And I just stared at Grandpa, mouth dry, hands clenched, wondering what he meant. Wondering what truth he was about to dig up in front of everyone. But whatever it was, I knew, deep down, nothing would be the same after he said it. Not for me, not for them, and not for the Langford name. You know that feeling when time doesn't just slow down? It splits? That's what it felt like when my grandfather said those words. "You've been hiding the truth about her since the day she was born." Nobody moved. Even the children, normally shielded from adult tension with iPads and dessert, were quiet, picking up on the electricity in the air. My mother looked like she'd seen a ghost. My father's face was locked in stone. "What are you talking about, Dad?" My father said finally, his tone controlled but tight. The kind of tight that covers fear. Grandpa didn't sit back down. He stood straighter, the years seeming to fall away from his frame as something fierce took over. "I mean exactly what I said," he replied. "You've spent Melissa's entire life diminishing her. Not because she failed you, but because you failed her." My breath caught in my throat. I glanced across the table. Mason had leaned back, arms folded, jaw tense. Eric blinked rapidly, like his brain was rebooting. No one spoke. "I've kept my mouth shut for too long," Grandpa continued. "Out of loyalty. Out of some foolish idea that protecting this family meant keeping your secrets. But watching you humiliate her, again, in front of everyone? Number not tonight." I opened my mouth to say something, to stop him. Not to protect them, but because I suddenly didn't feel ready to know what was coming. But he kept going. "Melissa," he said, turning to me, "you were never the mistake. You were the only honest thing this family ever produced." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "What are you even saying?" My mother snapped, her voice breaking. "You're confusing everyone." "No," Grandpa said firmly. "You're just scared the truth is finally crawling out from under the rug." He pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with a wax stamp. The room held its breath. He placed it in front of me. "This is yours," he said. "And you should have had it years ago." My fingers hovered above it. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at my parents with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment laced with grief. 28 years ago," he said, "your mother got pregnant. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't convenient." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slowly. "Don't," she whispered. But he did. "They considered giving you up," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "Because they wanted sons. Because daughters weren't part of the plan. Especially not one who would disrupt the picture they were painting of their perfect life." I couldn't breathe. "They told the family you were an accident," Grandpa continued. "But what they never told you is that for the first few weeks after you were born, they left you at my house." I blinked. "What?" "You stayed with your grandmother and me," he said. "Your mother needed time to recover," she said. "But the truth was, they were deciding whether or not to keep you at all." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not." "It's true," he said softly. "I held you every night, fed you, sang to you. And when they finally took you home, I made your father promise me that he'd never treat you differently." He looked at me then, not as a grandfather, but as someone who'd been carrying a secret so heavy it had aged him. "He broke that promise," he said, over and over again. I stared at the envelope. My hands were trembling now. "What's in here?" I asked. "Letters," he said. "From your grandmother. From me. We wrote to you in those early weeks, thinking that maybe, someday, you'd need to know where you truly belonged." I couldn't open it. Not yet. "I'm sorry I waited so long," Grandpa said. I thought maybe things would change, that they'd grow, but they didn't. And now you're grown, and it's time you knew." My father stood up abruptly. "That's enough," he snapped. "This is our family, Dad, not yours to meddle with." Grandpa turned to him slowly. "No, Daniel," he said, steel in his voice. "You gave up the right to define this family the day you made your daughter feel like an outsider in her own home." The silence that followed was like ice water. I picked up the envelope with both hands. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was holding not just paper, but proof. That I wasn't imagining the difference. That I hadn't invented the distance. That what I felt growing up, the being left out, the coldness, the conditional love, wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. And I wasn't crazy. I was just unwanted. At least by them. Not by everyone. Not by him. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. I drove for nearly 2 hours past the edge of the city, the highway lit only by intermittent street lamps and the glow of my dashboard. I wasn't running away. I just needed silence. A space big enough to hold the noise in my head. In the passenger seat, the envelope sat unopened. I'd clutched it like a lifeline as I left the dinner table, barely hearing the voices calling my name. My mother had tried to follow me out. My father didn't even stand. And Grandpa. He just watched me leave, eyes glassy but proud. When I finally pulled into a rest stop near a lake we used to visit when I was little, the sky was already fading into midnight blue. I turned off the engine, cracked the window, and sat there. Headlights off, hands in my lap, heart pounding like it didn't know what to do now that the performance was over. Because that's what it had been, hadn't it? A performance. 28 years of playing the role of the quiet one, the sensitive one, the one who never measured up. All for a family that had decided who I was before I could speak my first word. I finally opened the envelope. The wax seal cracked easily, like it had been waiting for me all this time. Inside were 4 handwritten letters. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Delicate looping script from Grandma, and bold, blocky lines from Grandpa. The first one was dated just 6 days after I was born. Dear Melissa, we don't know where life will take you, or if these words will ever reach your hands. But we wanted you to have something that belongs only to you. The truth. My breath hitched. Right now, you're asleep in the guest room crib. You have the tiniest hands I've ever seen, and you make these little sighing noises when you dream. Your mother says she's not ready. Your father says girls are a complication. But you, my dear, are pure light. I stopped reading, closed my eyes, tried to keep the sob from clawing up my throat. Because there it was. The confirmation I didn't know I needed. The truth that shattered the lie I had wrapped myself in for years. Maybe if I just try harder, they'll see me. They had seen me. And they had decided I wasn't worth keeping. I read the rest of the letters slowly, carefully, like they were relics from another world. And maybe they were. My grandmother wrote about the first time I smiled. Grandpa described taking me on long walks in the park, humming old Sinatra tunes while I stared at the trees. You looked at the world like it surprised you, he wrote once. Like everything might still turn out okay. I cried then. Not pretty, cinematic tears, but the kind that come from your ribs. The kind you can't control. The kind that taste like release. It was past 2 in the morning when I finally folded the letters and placed them gently back inside the envelope. I rested it on the dashboard and stared out at the lake, remembering a trip here when I was 9. The one time I recalled my father letting me skip stones beside him. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't even looked at me. But I'd cherished that silence like it was a gift. Now I understood why. I had been starving for crumbs of affection because I hadn't known I deserved more. That night by the lake, something shifted. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to stop carrying the lie that I had been the disappointment. Enough to stop asking what I'd done wrong. Because the truth was, I'd done nothing wrong. I had just been born inconvenient. And instead of choosing me, they had tried to mold me into someone easier to love. But I wasn't here to make them comfortable anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a clear decision in my chest. I was going to talk to Grandpa. Not just to thank him, but to ask him the question that had been gnawing at me ever since he placed that envelope on the table. Why now? Why, after nearly 3 decades of silence, did he decide to speak? And what else was still buried beneath the polished floors of our picture-perfect family? I didn't know what answers I'd get. But I was finally ready to ask. I visited Grandpa the next day. He lived in the same brick house he'd had since before I was born. A one-story with a wraparound porch, white shutters, and rose bushes he still trimmed by hand. It smelled like lemon balm and old paper inside. Familiar. A little too quiet. He was in the kitchen when I arrived, pouring tea into two mismatched mugs. One said world's okayest golfer. The other was plain white, chipped on the rim. "You came," he said simply. I nodded. "I have questions." "I figured." We sat in the living room. The clock ticked on the mantel. A framed photo of me from middle school sat beside it. Braces, messy braid, oversized hoodie. I remember that day. I'd just won the regional science fair. My parents hadn't come. Grandpa had taken the photo. "I read the letters," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, like he already knew that part would be hard. Then I asked him what had kept me up all night. "Why now?" He looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me. Like I mattered. Like he was weighing the answer carefully, not because he was hiding anything, but because he didn't want to say the wrong thing. "I waited too long," he said finally. And I knew it. But I kept hoping, praying, maybe that your parents would change, that time would soften them. A beat passed. I wanted to believe they'd wake up one day and see what I saw. His eyes misted then, but he blinked it back. And I stayed quiet because I thought I was doing the right thing, letting them be parents, not interfering. But they weren't, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. They weren't parents, not to me. He exhaled slowly. "I know, and I'm sorry." He set his tea down and reached into the side table drawer, pulled out another envelope. This one was thinner, newer. "What's this?" I asked. "A letter I wrote a few months ago," he said. "I was planning to give it to you on your birthday, but after what happened at dinner, I hesitated, then opened it." His handwriting was familiar now. Sharp, precise, confident. "Dear Melissa, if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I would have told you the truth when you were old enough to ask why things felt off. I would have made sure you never blamed yourself for the way they treated you. But mostly, I would have told you more often what I thought every time I saw you. You were never the failure. You were the proof that this family could have been better. You still are." I couldn't speak. My throat closed around something soft and painful. "I should have fought harder for you," he said, "instead of just loving you in the quiet." I looked at him then, really looked, at the wrinkles around his eyes, at the guilt he was still trying to carry for a choice that wasn't his. "You were the only one who ever tried," I said. That truth landed heavy between us. I took a breath. "They said, at the table, that they wished they'd had two sons instead of me." His jaw clenched. "I heard." "They meant it." "I know." And then softly, almost like a confession, I said, "I think part of me still wants them to take it back." Grandpa didn't respond right away. He reached over, placed his hand gently on mine. "Wanting them to be better isn't the same as needing them to be," he said. "You've survived without their approval for 28 years. You don't need it now." I nodded, but something inside me still ached. "What do I do now?" I asked. He gave a small, sad smile. "You keep living. You build the life they never imagined you could. And when they finally look up and realize what they lost." "I don't rub it in?" "No," he said. "You won't need to. The silence will be loud enough." I stayed for another hour. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat, drank tea, watched the light shift through the windows. As I got up to leave, he walked me to the porch and said, "You have a right to your anger, Melissa. Don't let anyone shame you for it." I nodded. "I'm just tired of carrying it." He looked at me, calm, proud. "Then set it down, but only when you're ready. Not for them, for you." I got in the car and didn't cry this time. Because for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't just angry. I was seen. I didn't plan to go back. Not to the house, not to them. But a week after the dinner, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the writing immediately. My mother's. Thin, slanted script that always looked like it was trying too hard to stay between the lines. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, the kind she saved for holidays and people she pretended to like. Melissa, we need to speak. I'd prefer we do this in person. Sunday, 3 p.m. The house, please come. Mom. No apology, no explanation. Just the expectation I would show up. And a part of me, the old part, the conditioned part, wanted to ignore it. Wanted to throw the letter away, pretend it didn't affect me. But I couldn't. Because there was still a part of me, stubborn, unfinished, that needed to look them in the eye and ask the question that had been echoing since the night everything split open. Why didn't you choose me? When Sunday came, I wore jeans, a black sweater, no makeup. I didn't dress to impress or to soften. I dressed like myself. The front door creaked the same way it always had. Mason opened it. He didn't smile. They're in the den, he said, like he was guiding a stranger through a museum of mistakes. Eric sat stiffly on the leather couch, arms crossed, lips a hard line. My father stood near the fireplace as if he were preparing a lecture. My mother was seated in the armchair, perfectly posed, not a hair out of place. Melissa, she said, as if my name tasted bitter. I got your note, I said flatly. Sit. I didn't. I'll stand. A tense pause. Then my father cleared his throat. This has gone too far, he said. Your grandfather spoke the truth, I interrupted. He blinked. You think he's the victim in this? My mother snapped. He humiliated us. No, I said calmly. You did that. He just stopped covering for you. Mason exhaled sharply. Look, I don't know what's going on, but this drama is tearing the family apart. I turned to him. You never saw it, did you? How I was treated differently. You were too busy being toasted and praised and handed things I had to earn 10 times over. That's not fair, Eric muttered. No, I said, stepping closer. How many times did you two get called brilliant? Gifted? Future leaders? And how many times did I hear I was confused, too sensitive, or still figuring things out? Even when I outworked and outranked both of you? No one spoke. I let the silence do its work. You said I was a failure, I said, turning to my father. Right there, in front of everyone. A failure we never wanted. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. I was angry, he said. It was a moment. No, I replied. It was a choice, and it wasn't the first time. My mother stood. You don't understand what it was like back then. We had plans, expectations. For sons, I said. You've been mourning the daughter you never wanted for 28 years. But I'm not mourning anymore. I'm done. Another silence. The heavy kind. The kind that wraps around the throat. I didn't come here for an apology, I added. I came to tell you this. You don't get to rewrite the story now that the truth is out. You don't get to decide who I am anymore. I pulled something from my bag, placed it gently on the table. A copy of the same photo Grandpa gave me. Me, as a baby, in his arms. Smiling. He saw me, I said softly. Even when you didn't. My father looked away. My mother's eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. And then I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, my father spoke again. You were always too emotional, he said coldly. You took everything so personally. I paused, then turned back just once. No, I said. I just finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. And I left, not angry, not broken, just done. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final shout, no door slammed behind me, just footsteps. Mine. Finally walking away on my own terms. As I drove home, I passed the park near my high school. I pulled over, sat on the bench where I used to read during lunch while the others played and laughed and belonged. And I realized something. I didn't need to belong to them anymore. I belonged to myself now. And that was more than enough. It's been 3 months since the dinner. 3 months since I stood in that den, told my truth, and walked out of a house I'd spent most of my life trying to belong in. And I haven't gone back. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I always thought walking away would feel like a defeat, like giving up, like I'd failed to fix something broken. But instead, it felt like air. Like standing at the top of a staircase I'd been climbing in the dark and finally realizing, I don't need to carry this anymore. I didn't tell many people what happened. Not at first. Just my closest friend, Naomi. She cried before I did. And then she asked the one question I hadn't let myself consider. So, what now? What now? At first, I didn't know. I went through the motions, work, errands, sleep, but everything felt different. Like the lens I used to see the world had been wiped clean, and suddenly I could see the outlines of my own life again. And for once, I didn't see failure. I saw survival, growth, proof. So I made a decision. I took 2 weeks off work, not for a vacation, but for something more radical, something I'd been afraid of my entire adult life. Stillness. I stayed in a small cabin upstate with no Wi-Fi and barely any signal. Just books, a journal, and the sound of birds in the morning. It was terrifying at first. All that silence, all those thoughts. But then, something began to shift. Each morning, I wrote a letter to myself. Not the version of me that chased approval or shrank to make others comfortable, but the girl who held on through it all. The girl who built a life out of rejection. The woman who learned how to name herself. Some days the letters were messy, angry, full of questions. Other days they were soft, forgiving. But every word was honest. By the end of the first week, I knew I was never going back to who I had been. And on the last night, I sat by the fireplace with a blanket around my shoulders, opened my journal, and wrote, "You are not a placeholder in someone else's story. You are not a mistake. You are not broken. You are the author now." When I returned to the city, I felt like I had skin again. The day I got back, a letter was waiting in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name on the front. Melissa, in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single page. I don't know what to say. I keep trying to find the right words, but they never come. You're right. I was cruel, and wrong, and afraid. I thought keeping distance would protect me from disappointment. But it only built walls I couldn't climb back over. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday when you look back, you'll see that I knew. I knew I failed. And I regret it more than you'll ever know. No signature. Just the truth. Written in the same block letters he used on every birthday card that used to say so little. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it anymore. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the photo Grandpa gave me. The one of him holding me as a baby, smiling like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. That drawer used to be full of pain. Now it's full of proof. Proof that healing doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes when you stop waiting for them and choose yourself instead. They say you should never get too comfortable at your job. But when you've spent 16 years running a production line without a single safety violation, without a missed deadline, without even a single product recall, comfort isn't the word. It's commitment. I'm Amanda Reyes. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the senior floor coordinator at McLennan Manufacturing, one of the largest consumer packaging plants in the Midwest. I started there when my daughter was in kindergarten. By the time she graduated college, I was the one keeping the machines humming, the workflow steady, the numbers green. My team called me the anchor. My supervisors called me reliable. And for years, that was enough. Until one Monday morning, I was called into a conference room with beige walls and a forced smile from HR. "We're restructuring," they said, like it was a weather report. Not performance-related, just a strategic shift. I remember how the word strategic landed like a punch in the ribs. I wasn't fired. No, that would have made too much noise. Instead, they said they were phasing me out. My position was being streamlined into a new role, one that would be filled by someone younger, cheaper, more digitally native, right? Whatever that means. "And we'd love for you to help with the transition," said Lauren from HR, her voice soft, like she thought I might cry. I didn't cry. I nodded. Because after 16 years, you learn not to react until you're alone. The new hire was a 25-year-old named Devin. Fresh MBA, zero factory experience. He wore loafers on his first day, the kind that don't survive a warehouse floor. He introduced himself as a process optimization guy and smiled like this was his sandbox now. They asked me to train him. 1 week. That's what they gave me. I spent that week showing him the layout, the pressure points, the quirks of each conveyor belt. I handed over my manuals, my spreadsheets, the annotated logs I'd maintained over a decade and a half. I even walked him through the emergency shutoff protocol, the one I wrote myself after a near miss back in 2010. He didn't take notes. The night before my last day, I stayed late, alone. I walked the floor listening to the quiet tick of the machines, the hum of the automated packaging arm. Every corner of that space held a memory. Training new hires, fixing systems during storms, working through holidays so others could be home with their families. I didn't take a selfie. I didn't post about it. I just stood there and let the moment imprint on me. Then I turned in my badge. Nobody threw a party. No goodbye card. Just an auto-generated email. "Thank you for your service. We wish you success in your next chapter." I wasn't angry. Not yet. At first, it felt like grief. Like I had lost a part of my identity I didn't even know I still clung to. My daughter, Maya, came home from grad school that weekend. I tried to pretend everything was fine. "You okay, Mom?" she asked over dinner. "Yeah," I said, pushing vegetables around my plate. "Just adjusting." She looked at me the way daughters do when they know their mothers are lying but choose not to press. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You built that place," she said. "Don't let them make you feel disposable." I smiled, but inside I felt hollow. Over the next few months, I did what I've always done. I observed. From a distance. I still had friends on the floor. People who texted me, called me on bad days, told me things they weren't supposed to. And slowly, the cracks began to show. Missed quotas, safety violations. A small injury swept under the rug, then 2 more. Customers started complaining about late deliveries. The maintenance backlog tripled. One of the machines, a pressure sealer I'd spent years tuning, failed during a double shift, damaging thousands of units. I stayed quiet. Until the day Maya sent me a screenshot. It was a Reddit thread from a whistleblower account. "Working at McLean is a disaster. Ever since they pushed out the experienced staff, it's been nonstop chaos. I don't feel safe." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. And for the first time since I left, I didn't feel sad. I felt something else. Something sharp. This wasn't about cost cutting anymore. This was about the cost of forgetting who built the system in the first place. And I was done watching from a distance. The first time someone reached out, it was subtle. A message from Becca, one of the shift leads I'd trained back in 2015. She never called me unless it was important. "Hey, Amanda, can we talk? Something's going on." We met at a quiet diner off Route 9. She looked tired, paler than usual. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quickly. but I didn't know who else to call. "You're never a bother," I replied. "Tell me what's happening." She took a breath and launched into it. Missed safety checks, workers quitting mid-shift, Devin making decisions without consulting anyone on the floor. She described a conveyor jam that wasn't reported for 2 full hours because the night lead didn't want to wake the new boss. Thousands of units had to be discarded. "I tried to raise it to Lauren in HR," she said, voice low, but she just said, "We're in a period of transition. Be flexible." I felt a tightness crawl up my spine. "Has anyone else said anything?" She nodded. "Yeah," quietly, "but no one wants to risk being seen as a problem. You know how it is." I did. For 16 years, I watched how the company handled problems. First, they ignore you. Then they isolate you. Then they replace you. Becca looked at me, her voice barely a whisper now. "Amanda, I think someone's going to get seriously hurt." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lamp on low, flipping through old notebooks from my time at McLean. Process maps, contingency plans, even old floor rosters. My notes were always detailed. Obsessively so, some would say. But now they felt like breadcrumbs. Proof that the system had once worked. That it could again. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't an employee anymore. I had no title, no power. Just a box of records and a rising sense of responsibility. Then I remembered the whistleblower thread, the Reddit post. It hadn't been from Becca. Someone else had spoken up, which meant there were others, people who still cared. I created an anonymous email address and posted a response. If you've worked at McLean and noticed changes that put people at risk, you're not alone. There are people who will listen and help. Within 2 days, I had 9 emails, all from current or recently departed employees, most of them afraid, all of them angry. Stories of cuts to training hours, safety drills skipped, a forklift incident in Warehouse B that was never filed. But one email stopped me cold. "I was injured 2 weeks ago. Devin told me not to report it. Said it would look bad during audits. I had to use vacation time to heal." No name, no signature, just pain. That was the moment I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. I called Maya. She was in Boston finishing her graduate program, but she picked up on the first ring. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" "I need your help," I said. "Legal help." A pause. Then, "Tell me everything." By the end of the week, we had a plan. Maya connected me to a former professor who specialized in corporate whistleblower protections. We spent hours going through every note, every email, every piece of information I'd received. Everything had to be airtight, clean, documented. "You don't just want a story," the professor said. "You want change. That means being precise." And precise was something I knew how to be. Meanwhile, more messages trickled in. One from Raphael, a longtime technician who said he'd nearly quit after his suggestion to fix the ventilation system was dismissed as unnecessary expense. Another from Janice, who said morale was so low she'd caught one of her junior staff crying in the break room after being chewed out for asking too many questions. It was unraveling, quietly but steadily. I didn't tell them I was behind the email account. I didn't need recognition. I needed truth. But the moment that sealed it came late one night. I got a message from an unknown number. Just a photo. A production line, mid-shift. Boxes stacked haphazardly. A spilled container on the floor. And in the background, a worker using duct tape to repair part of the sorting mechanism. I zoomed in and felt my stomach turn. That was the same sorting unit I'd warned them about during my last month. I'd logged the maintenance issue. Twice. It had been flagged for replacement. They hadn't replaced it. They'd patched it. With tape. That's when the anger came. Not like a spark, but like a slow-building fire. Because it was no longer about me being replaced. It was about the system being broken. and I wasn't going to watch it crumble from the sidelines anymore. Not when people could get hurt. Not when the people I trained were left cleaning up the mess of someone else's strategic shift. You'd think after 16 years of loyalty, walking away would be the hardest part. But no. The hardest part was realizing just how quickly they had buried everything I'd built. The following week, I received a call from Jerome, one of the plant's machine operators. His voice was tight with frustration. "They're blaming us now," he said. "Management says the output issues are our fault, that we're not adapting fast enough to the new protocols." "Protocols?" I asked. "Yeah, Devin rolled out a new schedule system. Reduced downtime, fewer rotation breaks. He says it's lean manufacturing, but it's chaos. We're exhausted. Mistakes are up. Everyone's on edge." I knew what that meant. Cutting rotation breaks might look efficient on paper, but in reality, it pushed people past their limit. And in production work, fatigue was dangerous. Slower reactions, less focus, higher risk of injury. "What about safety audits?" I asked. Jerome laughed bitterly. "They pushed the audit to next quarter, said they needed time to prepare. It was classic damage control. Buy time, shift blame, hope no one notices." But I noticed. And I wasn't the only one. That weekend, I invited Becca, Raphael, and Janice to my house. No formal meeting, just coffee, sandwiches, and a whiteboard in my living room. It felt strange seeing them outside of the warehouse context. These were people I'd led for years. Now we sat as equals, strategizing like survivors. "I've documented everything I've received," I said, pointing to a binder I'd compiled. "We have enough here to show a pattern: mismanagement, neglect, and retaliatory culture." Janice looked uneasy. "But what happens if we go public? They'll retaliate." "They already are," Becca said softly, "just not loudly." Raphael leaned forward. "What do we want, Amanda? An apology? Or do we want accountability?" I met his gaze. "I want change. I want the people responsible to be seen. And I want the board to know what's happening under their nose." That's when the idea hit me. The board. They were always distant. High-rise executives who saw the plant through spreadsheets and quarterly reports. But if they were made aware of what was really going on, documented and credible, they couldn't claim ignorance. So I made a decision. I wrote a letter. Not an emotional rant. A case file. Detailed, professional, supported by photos, testimonials, and internal data that had made its way to me. I outlined the decline since the leadership shift, the impact of the decisions, the risk it created, not just to people, but to their bottom line. I ended it with one line. "The plant may be your asset, but it's our livelihood. You can't fix what you refuse to see." I signed my name. No hiding, no anonymous email. I mailed it to every board member listed on McLenn's public financial disclosures. Maya helped me draft a second version, one that would go to a regional labor watchdog if the board didn't respond within 2 weeks. Not a threat, just a contingency. Then we waited. 10 days passed. Nothing. On the 11th day, I received an envelope by certified mail. McLean Corporate Affairs. Inside was a brief, formal note from the board's compliance chair. "Ms. Reyes, thank you for your recent correspondence. We take these matters seriously and are reviewing the documentation you submitted. We will initiate a formal inquiry and will be in contact shortly. It wasn't an admission, but it was acknowledgement. And that was more than I expected." The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Amanda Reyes?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Daniel Pratt. I'm the senior advisor to the board's risk committee. I'd like to meet. Off record, confidential. Just you and me." We met in a neutral location, a small hotel conference room near the airport. He was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, carrying a tablet and a legal pad. He didn't waste time. "The board had no idea the transition was going this badly," he said. "They were sold a narrative of innovation and cost efficiency. Your letter painted a very different picture." "Because it is a very different picture," I replied. He nodded. You understand, if we investigate formally, it won't stay quiet. I'm not asking for quiet, I said calmly. I'm asking for truth. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Devon's position was championed by the current COO. If this unfolds the way I think it might, you're going to make powerful people very nervous. I'm not here to make friends, I said. I'm here to make sure no one else bleeds for someone else's spreadsheet. He didn't argue. He just closed his notepad and said, "You'll be hearing from us soon." As I drove home, something shifted in me. For months, I'd been collecting other people's testimonies, other people's truths. But now the system was finally looking back, and I wasn't afraid of what it might see. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. 3 days after my meeting with Daniel Pratt, I got a call from Janice. Her voice was tight. Someone's asking questions about who leaked the information. I closed my eyes. Are you okay? I haven't said a word, Amanda, she replied. But it's getting weird. Devon suddenly pulled me off scheduling duties, said it's just temporary. She paused, then added, and Becca got reassigned to night shift, without warning. It had begun. The pushback. The subtle retaliation companies use when they want to punish someone, but don't want to get caught doing it. The next day, Raphael called me in a fury. They wrote me up for a mistake I didn't make. A mislabel on inventory. That section wasn't even mine. My stomach turned. This was what fear looked like from the top down. And I knew how it worked. Not with pink slips or dramatic terminations, just enough pressure to make people doubt themselves. Isolate them. Shame them into silence. But this time I was ready. That evening, I opened the folder Maya and I had labeled Contingency Phase 2. Inside was a strategy we'd hoped we wouldn't need. Escalation protocols. Media contacts. A pre-drafted letter to the Department of Labor. And testimonies, sworn and notarized, from Becca, Raphael, Janice, and 2 others who hadn't come forward publicly yet, but were willing to step up if it came to that. I reached out to Daniel. They're retaliating, I said. Silently. Strategically. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I believe you, he said. But we need something actionable. A name. A pattern. Hard documentation. I'll get it, I told him. But when I do, I want this addressed publicly. You have my word. That night, I stayed up past midnight, combing through emails forwarded to me. One from a supervisor who questioned Devon's overtime cuts and was then removed from the shift schedule for 2 weeks. Another from a young temp who had resigned after being scolded for slowing down the line during a heat wave. No fans, no AC, just sweat and pressure and fear. And then I got the file that broke me. It came from an anonymous address. No message, just a scan of an incident report. A 19-year-old worker had been hospitalized after collapsing on the production floor. Heat exhaustion. No ambulance was called. He was driven to urgent care by a coworker. The report was marked internal only and buried in a closed log. My hands shook as I read the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. They had buried it. I forwarded the file to Daniel and then to Maya. Her reply came instantly. We have enough. We move now. That morning, we submitted the formal complaint to the Department of Labor, along with over 30 supporting documents and witness statements. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I called a journalist. Her name was Alina Foster, an investigative reporter I'd followed for years. She specialized in corporate accountability, quiet revolutions. When I told her the story, she didn't hesitate. On the record? She asked. Yes, I said, voice steady. Use my name. Use everything. I gave her access to the files, the testimonies, the photos. I even sent her the letter I wrote to the board. She asked sharp questions, took detailed notes, and then said the words I hadn't realized I needed to hear. You're not overreacting. You're doing what most people are too scared to do. The story was scheduled to run the following week, but even before it hit, something started to shift. Daniel called me again. This time his tone was different. Internal legal is now involved, he said. The COO is under review. There's talk of pausing Devon's role pending the inquiry. I didn't celebrate, because I knew retaliation has a long tail. The next day, my name was leaked. Someone inside McClellan, maybe HR, maybe Devon, told the staff who had filed the complaint, told them who had gone public. I found out from Janice, whose voice trembled with worry. They're calling you a traitor, saying you just want revenge. I didn't blame them. It's what management wanted them to believe. Because if they could turn me into the villain, they wouldn't have to face what they'd done. That night, Maya called. Are you okay? I hesitated. I don't know. I stood at the window, looking out over the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, Devon was probably spinning a new story. One where I was bitter, unqualified, difficult. But stories only work when people don't fight back. I thought of Becca on night shift, of Raphael and his fake write-up, of the young man who passed out while trying to earn a paycheck. And then I answered her. I'm scared, I said honestly, but I'm also done being quiet. The article went live on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, trying to pretend the day would be normal. But when my phone buzzed and I saw Alina Foster's name, I knew it was time. The headline read, Inside McClellan Manufacturing, a culture of retaliation, neglect, and silence. My name was in the subheading. So was the phrase, 16 years without a single safety violation. I read it slowly, every word. Alina hadn't sensationalized it. She didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. She had quotes from former employees, anonymized where needed. She had the timeline, the testimonies, the scanned incident report about the 19-year-old worker. She even included parts of my letter to the board. But it was the final line that hit the hardest. Amanda Reyes didn't speak out to burn bridges. She spoke out to protect the people still walking across them. The article spread faster than I could process. LinkedIn, Twitter, industry forums, even a Reddit AMA tagged me as the Macklin whistleblower. By noon, I had over 100 unread emails. Some were supportive, old coworkers thanking me. A few from total strangers saying they'd gone through the same thing in different industries. Quiet gratitude from people who had no voice where they worked. But not all the messages were kind. One email read, You think you're helping? All you did was put good people's jobs at risk. You should be ashamed. Another simply said, You'll never work in this industry again. I stared at that one longer than I'd like to admit, because a part of me feared it was true. That night, I kept the lights low. Maya offered to stay on the phone, but I told her I was okay. I wasn't. I was unraveling slowly, wondering if I'd miscalculated, if speaking up had done more harm than good. But then the first domino fell. The board of Macklin Manufacturing released a statement. Effective immediately, Chief Operating Officer Benjamin Calloway has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. Devon's name wasn't mentioned, but insiders knew what it meant. Calloway was Devon's mentor. His rise had been fast, reckless, and now clearly unsustainable. I thought about the smug way Devon had shaken my hand on his first day. The way he smiled like he already owned the place. The way he wore loafers on a concrete floor. No apologies. No acknowledgement. But silence spoke loudly. More messages came. Amanda, we owe you. That article hit harder than we thought. We're with you if you take this further. Janice. My cousin works at the warehouse. Said the entire shift paused when the news broke. They cheered. Anonymous. I've been working in silence for years. You reminded me that we deserve better. Former plant manager from another state. For every threat, there were 10 voices rising to meet it. But McClellan didn't stay silent for long. 2 days after the article, they launched a PR campaign, a blog post titled, Building a Safer Tomorrow. Buzzwords filled every sentence. New leadership, renewed focus, employee-first culture. No accountability. No apology. Then Devon reappeared. this time on a podcast hosted by a corporate innovation channel. His voice was steady, rehearsed. I think what we're seeing is the resistance that always comes with progress. Change is uncomfortable, but manufacturing needs modernization. Some people just don't like letting go. Some people? He never said my name, but I felt every syllable like a blade. I paused the podcast and sat with the silence. The arrogance, the total lack of ownership. It was the same story, told in different clothes. The same system that replaces experience with buzzwords, then blames the fallout on the ones who built the foundation. That night, I walked to the old plant entrance, just to see it. The lights were still on, forklifts humming, workers moving like ghosts under fluorescent buzz. 6 months ago, I ran that line. 6 months ago, I kept that place alive. And now they had the nerve to erase it all with a podcast and a PR spin. Number I hadn't come this far to let them write the final chapter. The next morning, I met Daniel again, this time at a downtown office. He looked tired but focused. "We've begun interviewing staff," he said. "The complaints line has been overwhelmed, and frankly, it's worse than we thought." I handed him a folder. Inside were new statements. People who hadn't felt safe until now. A former floor manager, a machine technician, even a junior HR rep who confirmed Callaway's pressure to streamline by targeting veteran staff. "You asked for actionable documentation," I said. "Now you've got it." Daniel nodded. "You've lit a fire, Amanda. And this time, it's not burning in the shadows." As I left the building, I saw the city skyline rising through the glass. I wasn't just fighting for my old job anymore. I was fighting for every worker who had been told they were too expensive, too slow, too outdated. And I wasn't done yet. The notice came on a quiet Thursday morning. An official email marked confidential for immediate distribution. The subject line, "Leadership transition at Macklin Manufacturing." Inside was a simple announcement. After a comprehensive investigation into internal operations, Macklin Manufacturing has accepted the resignation of COO Benjamin Callaway. Effective immediately, an interim leadership team will oversee operations while we evaluate long-term cultural reforms. No fanfare, no excuses, just an ending. I read the message 3 times, then set my phone down on the kitchen counter. The air felt still, like the moment after a storm when the wind finally dies down. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't crying. I was just still. Maya called 2 minutes later. "You saw it?" "I did. And?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "I thought it would feel like a win." "Doesn't it?" I paused. "It feels like a start." Because the truth is, justice never comes with a parade. It comes in waves. Quiet, slow, sometimes messy. And even when it arrives, it doesn't erase the damage. It just acknowledges that it happened. Later that day, I received a call from Daniel Pratt. "Thought you should hear it from me," he said. "The board is initiating a full review of plant policies, mandatory retraining, third-party oversight, and they're dissolving the performance review system Callaway implemented." I nodded, listening. "And Devin?" I asked. "Terminated last week." Quietly. But the board agreed to issue a public acknowledgement of the production failures under his leadership. It'll be part of next quarter's investor report. He paused, then added, "I hope that helps." "It does," I said. "But I didn't do this for the footnotes." Daniel hesitated, then said something that stayed with me. "You're one of the only people I've met who didn't speak up for recognition. You spoke up because you couldn't sleep knowing you hadn't." That night, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It had been months of tension, of pushback and whispers, of fear and doubt. But now, there was space. And in that space, something unexpected took root. Not revenge, not pride, but clarity. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Raphael. "We just had our first all-hands meeting with the new interim director," he said. "And Amanda, you won't believe this. They asked us what we needed, what had been broken. They actually listened. Becca texted later. They're reinstating rotation breaks, and we're getting hazard pay retroactively. Can you believe it? I could. Because when people finally see you, not just as a name on a badge, but as the spine of the system, things begin to shift. In small ways, but real ones. That weekend, Maya flew home. We sat on the back porch with coffee and warm blankets, watching the morning fog lift off the trees. She looked over at me. So, what's next? I smiled. Honestly, I don't know. But I'm not going back. You could, she said. They'd take you back in a heartbeat. I could, I agreed. But I spent 16 years proving my worth to people who only saw me as a cost. I'm done chasing validation. She nodded, thoughtful. What if you started something new? A training consultancy? You've got more knowledge in your notebooks than half the leadership teams in the state. I laughed. You're serious. Dead serious. You built a system from the ground up. You trained generations. Companies need that. But this time you set the terms. I let the thought settle. It didn't feel scary. It felt possible. And then 2 weeks later, I got the message that sealed it. It was from a regional plant manager at a competitor company. Amanda, we read the article. We followed what happened. I just wanted to say thank you. You gave people like me permission to question what we'd accepted for too long. If you ever decide to consult, we'd love to talk. Maya was right. I didn't need McLenn's approval. I had something stronger now. A reputation rooted in truth, and a voice that no longer whispered. By spring, I launched my own business, Reyes Operations Consulting. Not flashy, not loud, but real. We trained leadership teams on frontline communication, ethical staffing, and safety-forward production design. Within 3 months, we had 4 contracts. One of them, McLenn's former supplier. But the moment that mattered most didn't come from an inbox or a headline. It came one afternoon at the grocery store. A young woman in a warehouse hoodie approached me nervously. Are you Amanda Reyes? I am. I work second shift at McLenn. I just wanted to say, thank you. Things feel different now, safer. We can breathe again. I smiled. That means everything. She started to walk away, then turned back. You didn't just shake the system. You showed us we're allowed to stand up. That night, I sat alone in my office. I looked at the photo on my desk. Me and Maya from years ago. Both of us in oil-stained clothes after a volunteer build. She was right. All along. Sometimes the house needs shaking. Sometimes systems break. But the people? The people rebuild. And if they're lucky, they learn to lead on their own terms. Not quietly, not gratefully, but powerfully. Because survival isn't the goal. Standing tall after the storm is.